Why you suck at Total War, reason number 4. You don't use formations. Having discipline and order among your ranks is one of the most effective ways to get the most out of them. If your army's all over the place and no one's positioned with any real purpose, it can be very easy for your enemy to find your weakness, exploit it, and do what they like to your army. So what are the main things that a formation can do for us? Well, first of all, protection. It can help our army work together to protect each other from all the different threats that may come their way. It also allows you to protect some of your important components such as your front line or back line. Next, another key ingredient for victory, adaptability. Positioning your troops well can make life a hell of a lot easier when adjusting your army to face the enemy threats. If you have a bunch of units out of position, you may find it difficult to get a good counter matchup for them. And the last main point is that a formation will allow you to set up certain tactics with the arrangement of your troops. Whether it's setting up a heavy flanking attack on one side, protecting a ranged build, or using hammer and anvil tactics, a good solid formation can make all of these tactics a lot easier and more effective to execute. It's also important to understand where and why a formation is useful. A battle goes in 3 stages for the most part. We'll call the first stage pre-battle. This is where both armies approach each other, trying to do what damage they can, maybe with missiles, artillery, magic, harassing units, to try and give themselves those little advantages when it comes to the main battle. This is of course where both armies clash, and is typically where the battle is won or lost for one side. So your formation is only really used in these first 2 stages of battle. With the pre-battle, you're looking to set yourself up to give yourself the best engagements when it comes to the main battle. If you allow yourself to be set up for bad matchups and allow those matchups to happen, you're going to lose a lot of your main battle fights, and thus you'll have a hard time in the post-battle and you'll probably be defeated. A formation, like everything in Total War, has strengths and weaknesses. We're trying to use our strengths to set ourselves up for the best possible results in the pre and main battle. Which will bring us to our post-battle, where formations have pretty much gone to hell and everything's a bit all over the place. But this is quite normal. As front lines break and start to push through to flank round on the rest of the enemy front line, or to get after back lines, or the flanking units come round on the enemy front line, things will start to turn into a bit of a mess, and it will be a frantic race for both players to try and get the best matchups and do the most damage before their army has had enough and has run for the hills. So formations are for setting yourself up to win the first 2 stages and then leading you to a cleanup in the post battle. So here's a simple basic formation for those of you who aren't sure where to start with this. It's a fairly balanced formation that will work well against many different armies. The first thing you need in any army in any formation is a front line. In this case, I've got 4 units of Black Ark Corsairs who are a high damage front line. There are many different options for front line choices, but we'll get into that a bit later. The biggest danger for any front line though is going to be flanking. Units that come in behind the enemy front line and hit them in the back while they're trying to fight things in front of them is going to be devastating, and they'll be fighting on both sides and they won't last very long. So we've got to protect against that. Anti-large units such as spearmen are the best way to protect your flanks, as typically flanking units will be large units like cavalry or monsters because they're considerably faster than infantry. So a well placed anti-large unit at the edge of your front line can protect against that well. So that's front line and a little bit of front line protection on the flanks. Behind that you can start to put your back line. Things like missiles and artillery, they can be positioned behind the front line for their own protection. The units out on the flank can help protect them as well. Now a single spear unit on the edge probably isn't enough to protect everything you have, so some cavalry out wide on the flanks or wings can be helpful as well. And they have 2 options on how they can play, and it's going to depend on what the enemy is throwing at you on this side. They could stay back and defend to try and help protect that front line, or they could try and push up on the enemy front line. Like I say, the choice is going to depend on what the enemy's throwing at you. And with this particular army, we have enough to put some cavalry on the other side, although it's going to be significantly weaker than that right hand side. But either way, they can help defend the front line. And then any lords or heroes could go with your front line to help support them and use that magic to keep them in the game or to damage the enemy. And in a kind of reserve fashion, we've got a black dragon that can go where it's needed. If the front line needs support, I can send in the black dragon. If the right hand side is struggling, I can send in the black dragon. And that is a basic army formation, which is a good place to start if you have no idea about formations. I do have an entire guide on this, which I'll link at the end of the video. So most battles will play out with the eventual clash of the 2 main armies. By now you've hopefully learned that you're trying to arrange the best matchups and counters all across the front line and on the flanks to give yourself the best chance of winning. One slight problem with this is that the AI can attack so completely randomly, it's difficult to really make proper use of a formation. Playing against players is where formations can be a bit more useful. But either way, looking to get a solid front line with your formation is going to allow you to set up good tactics. You can defend your flanks or even push on the enemy if you've got the space to, such as this side, and I've got some spare cavalry here so I can start to get after the back line. I could set up some hammer and anvil from this. There's all kinds of different options, and I know what I'm doing, I know where everything is because I've got a formation on the go. Eventually you'll enter the post-battle stage, where as I said, everything's a bit of a mess, the front line is pretty much gone, units have broken and routed on both sides, so everything isn't really organised anymore, but this is where it's about trying to get those best counters and matchups to do as much damage as possible, wear the enemy down, and of course, be victorious. So start to experiment with formations if you don't already. There's so many different options, it's really unlimited what you can do. You don't necessarily even need a front line, you can attack in all kinds of different ways. It's about finding good army compositions and good formations to use them in. So let's take a look at a few different formations that we can use with one army. So this first one is a very balanced build. We got a swordsman front line, spears and cavalry on the edges, a bunch of missiles and more spears in the back line. So a fairly balanced formation. Not terribly strong anywhere, but not terribly weak anywhere either. The front line is swordsmen, with one unit of greatswords behind to help out where need be. That's an average front line at best. The flanks are some spearmen, some demigriffs on this side, spearmen and Reichsguard on the other side, so our flank units are pretty strong. We got a bunch of missiles, which can be powerful as well, and a couple of halberds to help defend all of that back line. So a fairly well-rounded formation, with the biggest danger being that the front line of this army isn't great, so it needs to watch out for powerful enemy front lines. A slightly different way to set it up now. Same army though, same build. This one could be more useful if you want to hold the front line a bit longer or if you're expecting a lot of monsters to come at you. We've got the usual front line and flank setup, but the front line is now spearmen, including some halberds, so it should be able to hold for a longer amount of time than a swordsman front line would, which is going to be useful if you want to buy some extra time to set up some hammer and anvil or get some flanking on the go. You could opt for a very, very long front line, making it very easy to flank the enemy in theory, and because it's a mixture of both swords and spears, it makes the front line very adaptable to get the best counters across the enemy front line. We've still got our cavalry on the edges, but if they get taken out, then it's going to leave our back line very, very exposed, as there's only some swordsmen back here to defend all the artillery and missiles. So this formation will give you a good chance to flank your enemy, but will leave you exposed in the back line. This one's still using the typical center, left wing, right wing formation, but one of the wings is heavily overloaded with troops so that we can push a heavy flanking attack on one side. All my cavalry and some extra infantry is over there to try and overwhelm one side of the enemy. This could leave us weaker in other parts of our army, but if we can overwhelm and break that flanking side quickly, we can aid our weaker areas. You could opt to spread your troops out a bit more. This is basically the same formation as the first one, just with some bigger gaps in between the units. This can be a good idea if you're outmatched in numbers and you need to spread more of a front line so that you don't get flanked. It does leave the gaps though, which means you could get flanked through those holes by single entity large units. So hopefully from this you can just take away some of the ideas of the different formations you could use. They're going to be useful in different situations, against different armies, against different builds, so it's just about learning that and experimenting with the different ways you could set up your army and your specific composition, and what kind of enemy armies and formations it does well against. And once you figure that out, you can bring it as a pre-made build against those similar types of armies. So take account of your army formation to help you maintain control of your force over the course of the first two stages of battle. You'll have to learn how to move it effectively and how to adapt it when need be. It's all well and good if you've learned how to pick your units wisely and make good army compositions, but it doesn't mean anything if you place them all over the battlefield with no real purpose. Every unit should have a reason for being where it is and should be able to help out other parts of the army so the army can work together and support each other. Your army is a team, so let formations help them work that way. Control and coordination is another valuable step towards Total War greatness.